Okay, it's been a little bit of a while since I did something that's a little bit more structured in terms of Hangouts, at least something that's actually aired. I've invited to join me today my buddies RJ and Rose. We all write. Um, RJ, you do what predominantly? Is it more so the fantasy or the sci-fi?
Um, More sci-fi.
And Rose, you are zombie fodder right now, I believe.
Yeah, yeah, I'm doing mostly zombies.
There are a couple other folks that I've invited if they feel free, if they decide to show up. They're welcome to do so. I'm also open up the Q&A. If there's anybody in the audience that does some creative writing that would like to join in, feel free to drop me a line via Q&A, and I'll be more than happy to invite you. But for now, we're going to stay with a fairly small panel. I've tapped a few other people on the shoulders. I don't know if any of them will necessarily show up. But one thing that I'm going to need to cover in one of the upcoming Power of Woo episodes is more pertaining to this notion of thought forms, or tulpas as they call them. And all that this is a psychological construct that a person builds. And over the course of building these kind of constructs, after a while it starts getting its own persona, and they refer to it as, you know, it has its own personality, its own thoughts, and all this other stuff, and claim that this is your subconscious mind communicating with you, as well as a lot of other weird shit, too. But this is something that all writers, I think, are pretty well familiar with, the idea that you sit there and you work on your character and start fleshing them out. And in doing so, they start getting personalities of their own to the point that you can actually have a discussion or even argument with some of your characters.
Or the fun thing, you've written out this, you've plotted, and you're like, okay, this is going to happen, and then this is going to happen, and my character's going to do this, and you go to write it, and your character will not.
Yeah, the character's like, I'm not going that way. Fuck you. No, I'm not. No. I know what happens if I go to the roof. I've read the script, motherfucker. I'm not going there.
Yeah.
I'm going to go out this way. To hell with you. And then you, as the writer, have to start compensating because as you're writing it, the characters start kind of wanting to go their own way. And it's almost as if they have a will of their own, which is similar to this kind of concept.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of the actual process of creating these characters, I mean, it can start off with a description. It can start off with a name. But I don't know, I guess you could say the personalities of the characters seems to be almost an emergent property of just working on it. It's like just an emergent process.
Mm-hmm.
It just kind of happens.
I'm fond of character sheets that I acquired a great many different types of character sheets and character questionnaires and stuff when I was doing theater in high school. And I have this binder just full of character sheets. And so I tend to start there with the, what is this character afraid of anything? What are their phobias? And these kind of just, silly questions that, when you're acting or even when you're writing, that they may not come up.
Well, in your mind's eye, the more time you put into developing their quirks and whether it be personality flaws or traits or what have you, the more real they start coming in your own mind.
Exactly.
What strikes me as interesting is there's apparently a rather substantial online community that, while they don't actually write, they create essentially characters like us writers do. And this is what they're referring to when they're using this word tulpa, is basically character profiles they'll build in their head that they can interact with. Now, granted, these people take it to the extreme that they actually try to visualize it, so it's like it's wandering around with them, which is really weird to me. That's taking it a step too far.
It's like imaginary friends for grown-ups.
Yeah, yeah. Now, is in terms of the writing process, we all, in some levels, have those, but we understand they're in our head. We don't try to make them, visual extensions. We don't take them to coffee.
Yeah.
Especially because in other cases of those of us that predominantly do like fantasy and sci-fi, yeah, I don't think they...
That can be horrifying.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm just going to take my three-headed alien friend out for lunch.
Yeah. But in terms of the kind of characters that you work on, how long do you figure it takes a character in your mind to kind of flesh out enough that you could really have a conversation with it, so to speak?
Oh, it depends. Like, it depends a lot for me on how much I'm working on the character. Like, if I sit down and I spend, 6 hours, and just fill out a million character sheets and whatnot, and just keep going and going and going. When I'm in that kind of zone, just a matter of hours. Sometimes even minutes. Sometimes you have a character pop into your head fully formed, and you fill out a character sheet.
When we're working on 12th Tribe RPG, somewhat unfortunately, we had to chuck Nodvik out of the group because he started, quote, quote, taking the game too seriously. And what happened was he was getting so into his character that the character that he was running in the game was just obnoxious. And we all liked him as a person. It's just the character he was playing was such a nuisance, but he couldn't separate that character. You know, the character was going to do what it was going to do, regardless of what he wanted, which it's a similar kind of concept.
Yeah, I tend to enjoy like the MMORPG, yeah. For just that sort of like immersive character roleplay. But when you're talking like tabletop, like the character is kind of a completely different thing, and I'm just like, whatever. It exists, and I don't bother fleshing it out very much. And I'm just like, yeah, it's pretty much me, but if I could do these things. Like,
I've seen a lot of people flesh it out just like you would if you were writing the character. And sometimes these people get swept away by the character, and I've met some people that it becomes absolutely unhealthy for.
Yeah. I have found myself in the unhealthy position with MMOs, though. Not so much when it's a tabletop, because I'm having to speak instead of type. Like, I'm not writing. And so it's different. And so you wind up, like, when role-playing within, like, an RPG, it's anything done, say, publicly is your character, you know? And so it's that character. And so I do tend to flesh those characters out quite a lot. But I don't for a tabletop. I don't feel the need to.
You don't have the same kind of investment.
Yeah. For some reason, if I'm writing it down, I need to be invested. But if it's something I'm saying out loud, then it's coming more from me.
That makes sense. I mean, you don't have to build so much of a construct for that.
Yeah.
But ultimately what these things are is just psychological constructs, things that we construct in our mind, and after a while they start becoming their own life form, so to speak. Because if your characters only act the way you would, they're not going to be distinctive. I mean, it gets to the point that each one, eventually, if you're good at it, is going to have their own speech pattern and their own candor and words that they use that you might not, even.
Definitely. It's funny, I can't write characters if I can't who use accents that I can't do, because I then for some reason can't hear the accent in my head, and so the lilt and the timbre and whatnot is wrong. The cadence to their words is incorrect if I can't hear that accent in my head, and I can't hear an accent in my head unless I can perform it, unless I can speak with it.
Yeah.
Hey,
and that's
sorry, but I'm gonna bail on you guys.
Oh, that's okay, RJ. You said that you had to do.
Yeah. All right.
Glad
See
we
you.
got you for you, though. Take care, man. Oh, that's a bummer.
Yeah.
A little bit distracted as it is. Well, I'm going to bring in somebody that does things on a slightly different venue. I'm going to invite in Cliff. And we'll give Jade an invite if she bothers to show up. Never know with her. Throw them on the list. Most people are at work. I kind of picked a fucked up hour for it, and I know that.
Yeah. Well, it's also what you call it? For Jade, anyway, it's planting season in California.
Yes, this I'm quite aware of.
So she's getting her garden ready.
There we go. The thing that I kind of wonder about, though, what is the distance between what we do when we're writing in terms of, building the proverbial character profile and this kind of stuff and getting a feel for what this person is and represents and all this kind of stuff. And I'm being distracted by my own monitor on screen. Let's adjust this.
Hi there, how you doing?
Hey, Cliff.
I understand. I know that you do a bit of things like modeling and this kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, the Warhammer 40,000 stuff that I do, that has a fair amount of character and certainly has a big theme, kind of overarching theme in it.
The question I have for you, because I know that this works with writing, as you're sitting there and working on, so to speak, fleshing out the characters and what they represent and this kind of stuff in your head, do they start developing almost like a persona or almost an attitude or theme to them, almost.
Kind of. I mean, I'll give you an example. And there's a character called Commissar Yarrick. In fact, give me a second. Where's my old codex? So, where is he? I'll just read out the sort of the bit in the codex. There he is. No, it's not him. It's a bit of him.
What are you doing, pup?
Yeah. Okay, just going to read out as a page. Commissar Yarrick was an old man when Orc warlord Gazskull Thraka attacked his world of Armageddon, and the siege of Hades began. His years with the Imperial Guard had been eventful ones, for he had seen action on a dozen war zones and regiments on Necromunda, Luther, McIntyre, and Armageddon. Sorry, that's 3 places. His last mission was to run the Department of Ministerium recruitment program on Armageddon, where the 4th Regiment was being reformed. Armageddon began being a large and populous world with a substantial military recruitment base. The 4th Armageddon was a big regiment, almost an army in its own right. In his youth, Yarrick had learned the Orc tongue whilst fighting on Varun. Since then, he had made a study of the creatures and was considered an expert on the Orc mind. During the Battle for Armageddon, his knowledge was to prove invaluable, though it was undoubtedly would have been used to better effect if it wasn't for the stubbornness and arrogance of Hermann von Straub, the Lord of Armageddon. Rather than listen to the advice of the old commissar, von Straub had banished him to Hades, a sprawling hive complex away from the seat of government. As it happened, this was probably the best decision von Straub made during the whole war. The Orc attack was swift and seemingly unstoppable. Von Straub's armies were by no means small or poorly equipped, but they could not stand before the savage Orc advance. Only when the Orcs reached Hades did the surging... Excuse me, my mouth is going funny. Did the surging tide come to a halt before the well-ordered defences that Commissar Yarrick had quickly put into position. Even so, the initial Orc attack, led by Warlord Olgard, would have swept away the human resistance if it wasn't for the presence of Yarrick himself. The Warlord glimpsed the Commissar across the battlefield battle lines and drove his force directly to where Yarrick stood. With a barbarous roar, the Orc threw himself on the Commissar. He swung his snapping battle claw, it's like a big massive claw on his end, and it's a metal one. They do a lot of cybernetic components. Anyway, and severed his arm at the elbow. The Warlord's bellow of victory was cut short as Yarrick, fighting the pain and shock as no normal man could, swung his chainsword in a crimson arc and severed Olgar's bony head from his shoulders. The Orc's body collapsed to the ground while the head still continued to sneer and curse momentarily until the creature's extraordinary metabolism finally conceded that it was dead. Yarrick calmly reached down and plucked the battle claw from the Orc's twitching body. He held it aloft so that the green-skinned warriors could see it and know that their champion had suffered defeat. A hush fell across the battlefield, and as man and Orc gazed in silence on the gnarled old man brandishing the bloody claw. The humans cheered and the Orcs wailed in horror, and once the defenders leant upon the aliens with indomitable vigour. Only when the Orcs had finally been beaten from Hades did Yarrick finally allow himself the luxury of passing out. News of this incident spread like wildfire amongst the Orcs. They said that Yarrick could not be killed, and that his gaze was a death to even the most powerful Orc. Wherever Yarrick fought, Orcs would flee in terror. Whatever passed for terror inside the inhuman green skulls. Yarrick understood the Orc mind.
This is a character that's part of the lore of Warhammer, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, when you're now,
well, I've got a bit more. I've got a couple of short paragraphs. It's not long.
Okay.
And it adds to the character. It makes it more interesting.
Okay.
So Yarrick understood the Orc mind well and exploited this weakness to the full. He had Olgar's battle claw fabricated into a prosthetic limb to replace his arm the Warlord had taken from him. Later, he lost his left eye to a splinter shot from a laser, and had a bionic implant that projected a pulse of laser light. This terrified the Orcs even more. They called him the Bale Eye, who could kill with a glance. For 6 months following the fight in which Yarrick lost his arm, the defenders of Hades held out against further attack. Those who survived paint a confused picture of heroism and dark savagery as the orcs gradually infiltrated the hive complex. But all agree it was that Yarrick kept the defenders together and brought them back from the defeat time and time again, whose dogged belief in ultimate victory gave the others strength to go on. The time that he brought was to make all the difference. By the time the relief forces of the Imperial Guard and Space Marines arrived, the orcs had worn away the human defense. Even as Yarrick and his few remaining defenders were gathered away, the last stands of the orc armies were crumbling away. Yarrick was one of the few survivors of the fighting around Hades. His barely living body was found by rescue searchers amongst the ruins, dozens of orcs' corpses heaped at his feet. It took Yarrick many months to recover from the injuries, by which time the orcs had been defeated and a new lord installed in place of the insane, incompetent von Straub. The old commissar expected nominal retirement on a training post on Armageddon, where the planet's armies were being reformed. However, knowing that the supreme warlord Ghazghkull Thraka was still living proved too great a distraction for Yarrick. Only a few months of peace, he strapped on the Orc battle claw and reported for duty, vowing that he would not rest until Ghazghkull was hunted down and destroyed at last.
Now, the thing is, when you're now this particular character, this one isn't one of your creation, correct?
No, that's one of theirs.
But whether you're dealing with the miniatures or what have you, do you have a firm notion of what this character is?
Yeah. I mean, for example, if I'm playing with my Eldar and I use a Farseer is he has the actual power of woo. He can tell the future. You know, the Eldar are kind of in tune with the galaxy or something. I don't know. I don't really get it, but so they got psychic powers they can use, and you know, divination abilities and things like that. Now, knowing what they're like, I can use the rules to my advantage and utilize that model specifically for a job. So, for example, you can use your Farseer to boost a squad. So you can give them, you can do a psychic power on your own guys, giving them guide.
Well, it's not quite as complex as, for example, a character created by an author or what have you. But are there still moments that you're like, no, this character wouldn't do this kind of thing or what have you?
Well, the thing about it is the game is really about.
That character would be.
It really is. It's a game. So the aim of it is to defeat your enemy. So you don't really give them a sense of morality. The morality is to kill the enemy. That's basically it. You know, it's a war.
I mean, more so personality than morality. And the dogs barked.
Not really. I mean, I do give them a name as a character. You know, so for example, one of my commissars is Commissar Jevsky.
I mean, you could just as easily number them if you're not really giving them a personality, you know? Yeah. I mean, what's the point of a name without a personality? It's just to signify which one you're talking about.
Do you tend to favor units for strategic purposes, or do you have some that more so just simply the way that you've painted them or what have you makes you want to favor those units?
Sometimes. I mean, there is a kind of not a rule as such, but a mentality that your warlord is you.
Ah.
So the commander of your army is you. In fact, I have considered the idea of, you know, the 3D printing stuff, about getting a laser scan of my head so I can replicate heads to go on my models.
So to some degree,
for the Eldar one, I would make a more sort of pointed, you know, elf face, because that's what the Eldar are, with pointy ears.
Just make them a little bit more jug-headed. Teasing. Well, elves are, you know, the narrow head versus you're a little bit broader. You don't quite have the elf face now, do you?
Not really. It's the chin.
Yeah. You look a little bit more like Cliff Jumper. Oh wait, never mind. But when you're dealing with that lead unit, so to speak, the one that's more supposed to represent yourself,
Hmm.
you have that. Do you think that that perception affects how you treat that miniature when you're playing the war games?
Kind of. I mean, I want to protect that miniature from being killed. I also have a different. I also have a style to play because there are some people that are power players. You know, they'll dump drop pods with with 3 dreadnoughts right in front of your face. You know, right in front of your lines. And so they're basically saying, right, if I do this, then that's going to cause so much chaos that it's going to win me the game. I tend to have a more balanced army.
Chaos on the other side, or chaos on your own in some cases?
Yeah. I mean, the interesting thing is when you know that you've got someone who's going to be a power player, you then create an army that's capable of dealing with a power player. You know, I mean, like for example, there was a guy who did exactly that. He actually used an army which could have 6 dreadnoughts. Now, a dreadnought is like a walker thing. So let me find a picture because it's easy to show you a picture. So you got a normal Space Marine, and if he's killed in combat. Sorry, not killed in combat. If he's damaged in combat to such a point that his armor would his body no longer works, you can.
If you were to introduce a character into the game, though, that was one of these characters that you're used to out of the fiction, do you think it'd behave differently? Or do you think that you'd want that character to act closer to how you identify that character in terms of the fiction?
Sorry, would you say that again?
Okay, let's just say you throw a miniature on the map. It's one of the characters that's out of the fictional background of Warhammer. Do you think you'd try to have that character act more along the lines of that fictional character, or would you be doing them straight in accordance to how you'd apply your strategy normally?
The answer is yes, because the models are generally specifically done for a purpose. They have a given purpose. You know, so sweet. I don't mean that in a cheesy sense either. I really do. Anyway, yeah, you've got different characters that do different jobs. I mean, I'll give you an example. So I just showed you a picture. So that's a dreadnought. So it's basically a Space Marine, and his body can no longer function. So they effectively put him into a life support machine with legs and guns. So he can continue to fight for the Emperor even after.
I'm gonna derail you for a moment, Cliff. Basically, I was trying to see if there was some kind of parallel here. Now, in terms of the writing process, when we're working on characters, what we do is we sit there and we start off with, the proverbial empty shell.
Mm-hmm.
And what we do is we start fleshing them out. We start figuring out, what the pros and cons are of them, whether they have fears or aspirations or what their objectives are.
Mm.
And I didn't know if this translated potentially into something like, wargaming or something like this, that you might start ascribing varied traits to some of the different models or what have you, and start fleshing them out in your mind or whatnot. Also, projection of a consciousness of sorts, whether it be your own or a persona, what have you, that they're somewhat infused with.
Mm. There is an element of that. Because you can create whatever you want within your own mind. But if another person is playing you across a games table, they're not going to see anything other than the model that you're using and the the guns that it's holding.
Yeah, because it's entirely in your own head.
Mm. So it's not a transferable idea.
Yeah. In writing, it's a little bit more so because people will start identifying with these characters in different ways. So that's obviously a little bit more in that regard. in terms of the translation of from one mind to the next, as opposed to it just being entirely internalized. Now, this is a conversation that myself and Rose and RJ, who unfortunately had to head out early, have had before. That when we're working on our characters, there are times that they'll take an abrupt right turn, so to speak, or an abrupt left turn from where we would want them to be going because it's part of their persona. Now, also, I'm not entirely positive on Rose here, but RJ and I were talking about this a little bit before we went on air. But when somebody else tries to write one of my characters, or utilize one of my characters, there's this apprehension of you're going to screw it up because you don't have that mental model of who this character is.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that translates.
I've never had somebody try to write or play one of the characters that I've built, but taking back to the acting thing, every actor plays the same character differently. There have been 18 million iterations of Steel Magnolias.
Yeah.
And my Weezer was different than any other Weezer I've seen. Just as my Dorothy was different from any other Dorothy I've seen. And they're always different.
Well, I mean, go back to the classics, the notions of like the Cinderella or Romeo and Juliet, all these things that have been done to death. And every instance is a very different character with a very different persona. And frankly, I think that most of the ones that fails are the ones that people don't have these strong mental models of what the character is supposed to be about.
Yeah.
I think there's one thing that here's an interesting analogy to what you were saying about spoiling my character kind of thing. When the Christians talk about God, and like killing, it's like God wouldn't do that.
Because they have a character in their head of who this God character is.
Yes.
And they sit there and will base everything upon that mental model that they have. And I think that whether it be something like, some of the Christian notions of God or demons or angels or whatever it might be, they have a mental model of what these things are and what they would do, and I think it's somewhat of a predictive model. But it's a very strong psychological construct.
I think you figured it out, 13. God, angels, demons, all of this, tulpa.
Yeah. That's what it comes down to. Now, incidentally, for the sake of the people watching, a tulpa, it's T-U-L-P-A. There are communities online that create these things, and they're entirely psychological constructs, but the people that are into this create them with such detail that they can actually physically perceive them. So you could, so to speak, be sitting out having coffee, and the tulpa is there interacting with you, and you invest so much time and effort into the creation of this concept, even beyond that, which most writers do working on characters, is that these things can completely interact seemingly on their own without any need for your intervention as the, so to speak, writer of the environment.
It's kind of like a self-induced intentional psychosis.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, what struck me, because my last subject that I've been covering, because right now I'm on tulpas and these things that are referred to as thought forms, which incidentally in the classical literature and teaching of them, if the student believed that these things were actually real things, they were considered a failure, which I droned on and on about that with multiple people putting the clip in there in the last video I put up, because I feel that's what people are missing in the New Age movement. Now, when you're writing, or potentially in some cases with wargaming and what have you, is that we're creating these characters, or the people that are part of this tulpa community that are making these quote-unquote things. We know that they're not real. We know that they're just psychological constructs. But it seems like there are people in the New Age movement that just aren't grasping this. And in the Teal Swan video that I'm targeting right now, it's technically a two-parter, she'll sit and talk about quote-unquote demons as if they're tulpas, as if they're just these psychological constructs that are only products of the mind, yet she'll insist that they really do exist, but on a lower level frequency of reality below the one we're on, and all this weirdness. And talk about it even then as if it's real, while saying that it only exists subjectively. And there seems to be this real disconnect within these kind of communities. In addition to that, when they're talking about like angels and transcendent masters and aliens and crap, they're talking about these things like they're fully real, they exist to all people in all space and all time, and they're objectively there, while still using this word tulpa. And I'm like, okay, these things are just psychological constructs too. And I'll hear people sitting there and, two people supposedly channeling the same entity, and it's very different from one person to the next, and they write this off by saying, oh, well, it has a different message for each person. It has to be filtered through their perception, as opposed to saying, this is just a figment of your fucking imagination. This is a construct of your mind. This is like the characters that Rose and myself make, and to a somewhat lesser degree that Cliff makes, that we invest part of ourselves into them. We give them personalities, we give them character traits, we give them flaws, we give them bonus abilities, or what have you. We give them benefits, drawbacks, all these other things, to the point that they start becoming like people to us over time, to a greater or lesser degree.
Something else as well, people also get really pissy if you change the character. I mean, you look at comic books. If you had Spider-Man doing it for money, that would completely change the character.
And this is kind of the thing, is these people are taking these pre-existing characters, these quote-unquote aliens that they're claiming to be channeling or communicating with through whatever means. Each person's presenting them a little bit differently, but they seem to be trying to stay close to the script as it was introduced to them. Almost like if you were to go and read a book and really love the book and really like a character, let's just pick on Frodo for a moment. You've read The Lord of the Rings and all this stuff, and you really like the character of Frodo to the point that you have a mental model of who Frodo is and what he would say and what he would do. But then you start spinning it to make it your own, and this seems to be what these people are doing. But
it's almost in those instances you wish that these people who are doing this could talk to J.R.R. Tolkien and find out if they're right.
I agree with you on that completely. Now, there's a number of characters in my writing. Now, I'm not published, but my wife's read all my works, and there are characters in my stuff that she'll get frustrated because she has a strong model of who some of them are. And there are a couple of segments that she's just like, I don't really like them here. I don't agree with that, because her mental model is different than mine, but I know what's going on inside the character's head. Mm-hmm. And whether I agree with what's going on in the character's head or not, that's what's going on. And it's kind of this weird disconnect. It's like, where's the line between you as the author and the character?
Well, here's an interesting thought. That character I described to you, Commissar Yarrick, does that represent what I described?
Possibly. I don't know. I mean, that's kind of the thing, is you get this mental construct whenever somebody's sitting there, and the more detailed, the stronger the concept or the construct is. But there are so many things that are just, psychological constructs. They're part of how we think and how we engage with things.
Yeah.
This is probably a little bit different for you, Cliff, because, well, you've got Asperger's. So in terms of the development of the theory of mind and really empathizing with this and that, there's a certain level of disconnect for you that isn't there in the majority of the public.
I find that I'm not a very creative person when it comes to creating something from a blank slate. If I have a character, if I want to draw a picture of something, and I'm fairly good at art, but if I want to draw a picture of a character that already exists, not a problem, because I already have a basis to go from. Whereas if I've got to create something brand new, I mean, when it came to when I was at school, we had literature class, and I hated it because I just have no imagination for that kind of thing. When it comes to my model making, if you want to replicate something that exists, then I'm your guy, because I'm very good at replicating things. I can change the shapes of things and where they move and so on, whether it's a picture or, a physical model or something like that, and how it works together. But I'm not very good at creating things from scratch.
It's like one of my tattoo artists. He is a human photocopier.
Wow.
Anything.
Yeah.
He can replicate it perfectly. But to make a completely original image, he has to draw pieces of various things and combine them.
Yeah.
Well, in terms of us creating characters in our writing, we do a certain element of that as well, whether it be conscious or unconscious.
I do it a lot.
I mean, every person I come across, I tend to study them because there might be something about their personality that I might want to include into a character.
Yeah.
Now, in doing this, I'm creating a psychological model of who that person that I'm speaking to is.
Or who you think they are.
Exactly.
I'm reading Orson Scott Card right now. I'm reading all of the Ender books, or all of the books that take place in the Ender's Game universe. And one of the things that it keeps coming back to is our ability to know each other.
Yeah.
Like the ability of one human to actually know another human. And there's kind of a binary happening, because on the one hand you have Ender, and I'm now into the Ender's Shadow books, which focus more on Bean, who is a lesser character in the movie, but much more important in the books. And Ender his whole thing is once you truly empathize and know your enemy, or know a person, then you love them. You can't not. Whereas Bean is of the opinion that you cannot know another person. And
Now,
he's uncertain whether you can even know yourself.
On a lot of levels, I get that. Now, I'm the arrogant twat that'll sit there and go around saying, I know myself. But I know myself not through as much self-analysis, more so in interactions between myself and the varied characters that I both have in my head, as well as the ones that I play.
I think there's something else as well. Isn't it on a same personal level as well? That I mean, in the jokingly referred to it, the Great Debate community kind of thing, what helps me understand myself better is understanding how other people work as well.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. Now, I mean, there are elements of myself that were mystifying until I just started seeing them and studying them in others. And sometimes when you see it in somebody else, it's almost easier to self-reflect.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, I look at the varied puppets I have around here, and each one has its own very distinct personality. And those all arose organically. Right now, I've got, hang on, grab them down here. Right now, we've got the rat here, which is Rental Rat. He's whatever character I need him to be in theory. But eventually, he's going to become a regular when I'm ready to make him Ratsha Rat. And he will end up taking on that persona.
I've done a bit of that with some of my plushies as well, Lenny and Georgina, for example.
Sorry, go ahead, Claude.
Sorry, I was saying I've done the same thing with some of my plushies, you know, Lenny and Georgina, Scary Squirrel, for example.
Yeah. I mean, there's a strong desire, almost, to anthropomorphize things that, you know, this thing's brain is 2 fingers in the head. I'm always consciously aware of that, and I will crack jokes about it. But after a while, like with Skeptic Squirrel, for example, who's a snarky bastard that likes screwing with Fundy. And Fundy who's a little bit daft and will believe about anything. You know, these are different aspects of the self. These are different personality traits and quirks that some of them are part of me, some of them aren't. Some of them are just things that I think are worth poking fun at in others. But things that I could fall prey to as well in the right circumstances.
Well, there's something else. There's something in that, because I mean, if you watch Star Trek, the different races are aspects of humanity. That's the goal for them. So, for example, the Ferengi is greed. You know, so you can imagine Gordon Gekko.
I see a level of this.
Ferengi.
I also see a level of this in some of the stuff that's being promoted by the New Agers in terms of their claims of aliens, this and that, and they take this new utopian idea of what they think a perfect world would be, that everyone's oh so loving and all this other stuff. And of course they call more loving being a higher vibration, whatever the hell that's supposed to mean. But, you know, everyone's telepathic, everyone gets along, it's this perfect weird utopian notion, and they're ascribing this to these aliens that they're fabricating as these thought constructs. This is what their idea of the ideal would be, and they're just applying it to these psychological constructs. They can't find it here, so they're sublimating in their own mind by creating these theoretical alien life forms.
You know, I just finished reading my favorite book again. It's called The Chrysalids by John Wyndham. He's the guy that wrote The Day of the Triffids. And the characters in the story, they're they're telepathic, and the main character David, his sister, is very telepathic, and she talks to someone from sort of Nova Scotia area, from Labrador, all the way to Zealand, or New Zealand as we know it. And that's been spared from the nuclear war that happened, sort of a couple of 100 years ago. It's set in the future. And she gets a message to them, and they're coming to help, and they're running for their lives, kind of thing. And during the sort of dialogue of it, this person from Zealand, she sounds a little bit, I don't know, aristocratic in her attitude, and she says something along the line, they can communicate with their thoughts in like thought pictures, though, is the way it's described in there. And she says that normal people, the other people, will never understand, because you can't hide your thoughts from each other with thought pictures. You can't withhold the little bits. You can just be who you are, kind of thing.
No, there are some people who see this as being a beautiful, ideal notion, and I'll see this in some varied people promoting some of this blue crap, and I think, my God, that'd be horrible.
I know, me too.
And some of this comes from, I've written plenty of stuff, and when you're writing things, you have to look at things from more angles than most people tend to. And you think, okay, if you were in a world like this, what would be the downsides? And you start thinking about it, and it's like, oh my gosh, that'd be terrible.
Mm.
How does this dress look? That's it, I want a divorce, is the next thing that comes up, Because immediately you have this mental picture come to you of, oh, they think that, fuck no.
Ironically, this is the reason why people with Asperger's struggle in society, because what goes through their head tends to fall out of their mouth.
Yeah.
Mm.
And the fight is learning when to shut your mouth and not say something, and when to say something. And a perfect example of this was, I was coming home from Manchester, and get on a train. There's about 20 people on the entire train. It's barely anybody in it at all. We then get to the first stop, which is near a football stadium on a Saturday, and half of Manchester gets on the train.
Yeah.
So it's absolutely jam-packed. Well, I've got a bicycle on the train, so I've got to get from my seat to my bike and then to the door, and there's like 10, 15 people between me and the door. So I sort of get up and I say, excuse me, in a couple of minutes I'm going to be getting off. If you don't mind, you just move out of the way so I can get to the bike and get out the door. And everyone was fine with it. They were grumbly a bit, as in like not angry at me, but just like, oh, this is so inconvenient. It's the tut and roll of the eyes kind of thing. This is annoying but not terrible. Except for one person who gave me a hard time and said I shouldn't bring a bicycle on a busy train. And I half bit my tongue, and I just said it wasn't busy when I got on.
Yeah.
But the bit I bit my tongue on was the bit where my head said it only got busy when you and your mates got on.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, this is kind of the thing: is you have to have these kind of social filters.
Yeah.
That's actually why I like Skeptic Scroll, because he says the things that I won't. Typically speaking, he's that part of myself that just wants to be the obnoxious little twat most of the time. So I have him in there.
Wait, you mean you aren't always?
No.
I'm kidding.
But at the same point in Hangouts, to touch on what Cliff was just talking about, we had to throw, in terms of the Insomnia Shuffles that we run, I had to throw Prudent out for a little while because his mental filter was never fucking engaging, and it was just causing problem after problem. And I recognize that's what it was. Sorry.
I believe Prudent also has Asperger's.
He does.
Yeah. We learned that recently.
Yeah. I actually knew that at the time, and I realized what was going on there, but what can you do about it at that point? Because if you don't invite him, he's going to be offended, but if you do invite him, there's going to end up being a problem. But he's done good. He's working on it. He's been doing a much better job these days, and he's learning when to keep his damn mouth shut and not say something that's just going to, get people mocking him and giving him a hard time unnecessarily.
Yeah.
And frankly, kudos to him.
He also seems to be generating a sense of humor about himself as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in other words, he deliberately goes out of his way to say something just for the lols.
Yeah, I mean, he's gotten a lot better, and as much as, Insomnia Shuffles is just basically for us to sit there, goof off, and talk about whatever comes to mind, for him, I think it's been beneficial over time, and it's been a learning experience, and on that level, I think it's a good thing.
Yeah.
Beyond just providing a place where people can go and not talk about religion for a change.
Yeah. Because, I mean, the filter is something that everyone, on the spectrum or not, has to learn at some point.
Oh, yeah, and whether you're on the spectrum or not, there are times that filter just does not work.
Correct.
I don't know anything about that.
You know everything about that, honey. But part of that mental filter is, I don't know, in terms of some of the characters that I've made in my head, whether it be writing or what have you, there seems to be one or two of them that exist there just for the sake of mentally saying the things that I will not say aloud. Just like all comments that must be filtered out go to this one character. So you have almost that voice in the back of your head that's making all the snarky comments that you won't.
Yeah.
And that would be, I suppose, in some ways, my tulpa. I don't look at it that way, and I didn't know the term until recently. I just kind of referred to it as my inner child playing with matches and knives.
Your inner child is grounded.
Yeah, my inner child's always grounded. I'm worried you'll try and find a stick of dynamite or an M80 or something, little shit. But years ago, though, back when I was going to see a shrink, I would refer to that aspect of myself in a third-person narrative, as if it wasn't part of myself. It was to separate myself from, well, some negative thoughts. When I was younger, I had an impulse control disorder. And all of those impulses I would associate with this, inner child playing with matches and knives, analogy that I just used a moment ago. And it was to separate myself from that. And it wasn't until much later in life that I learned to try and embrace the proverbial inner shadow. It's like, okay, this is part of me. But in my youth, it was easier to separate myself from it. And I think over time, in separating myself from that, it became a character lurking in the back of my mind, much as the characters that I write.
I've come to realize that my inner child wants to eat chocolate all day, which is the reason why I'm a bit too fat.
But, I mean, the thing is, we have these terms for these very psychological constructs, whether it be the notion of the inner child or the notion of the ego, superego, and the id. The id is kind of your subconscious mind. The ego is who you present to the world, and the superego is the link between the two. That kind of unfiltered who you are thing. Because generally who we present to the world changes based on circumstance. Just different aspects of ourselves, and I think a lot of the expressions of that is what ends up being rolled into characters that we're writing about.
Yeah. I wonder if that's why so many marriages fail.
I've always
is that you finally introduce your actual self to your spouse over time?
I generally refer to that as masks, and I think most people can only wear masks for a limited period of time.
Yeah.
Before they start falling away. And let me rotate this. There we go. Get my camera back on screen a little bit here. Get red off cam. If I keep her on cam, I'm going to have to start making her play with puppets or something.
I missed the pretty. I wasn't looking.
Yeah, I'm officially renaming her a little character. It's funny, though, because talking about this whole notion of characters, one of the puppets is now controlled by her. It's a red panda, because I've been referring to her as Red for ages since I started doing videos in which I'd have her do varied reads and what have you. So, red panda, red reads, yeah, it works. So we went with that. And immediately she put it on, and she's like, do I need to do a character for it or anything? I said, no. The moment she put it on and was on camera with it, she immediately got into a character with it. The character just arose. It's just there.
It happens.
Well, when you're playing with puppets, though, people will sit there and you can be doing this, and people will start interacting with a puppet and completely forget that there's a person with their hand up its butt.
Yeah.
Did you see that video I did for Chris Mouty with the lion?
Yeah, to a degree, yeah. I mean, the thing is, we do tend to anthropomorphize.
Mm.
A lot of things. Puppets are one of them. It's almost easier sometimes, and they do this with therapy with kids sometimes, that instead of them talking to the scary therapist, they'll have them sit there talking with a puppet because the kid's much more comfortable talking with that construct.
Mm-hmm.
Because all of a sudden it's like, okay, this is not a person, this is this anthropomorphized thing, I want to learn about it.
Yeah.
And the puppet, to a degree, becomes a character not only in the mind of the person controlling the puppet, but even more so in the person that's interacting with it.
They also use puppets or toys or whatever when counselling child abuse victims.
Yeah, because the kids once again are more comfortable talking with the puppet. Now, what I think is ironic is I got to throw a little bit of irony in here for the heck of it. There was at one point ages ago that there was this restaurant I'd go to that had one of those little claw machines in the front, and a friend and I were trying to get something out of it, and by mistake we got this priest puppet out, which we then sat at the table vivisecting over the course of our dinner. And the manager came over and was really upset because there was a cop that he knew that had been trying to get that puppet for ages, or not puppet rather, but that little stuffed doll thing of the priest for ages, figuring the kids would be more comfortable talking to the priest sometimes than the officer. And now that we know a few things going on in the Catholic Church, that might have not worked too well. But it still goes along with the same concept that sometimes it's easier to deal with a construct, with something that's, whether it's still a product of your mind, it's regarded on a subconscious level as being external of the self.
Yeah.
I mean, I've written narratives with my varied characters in my stories just sitting there arguing about things that'll never be in a story, that are never in print, just to see what will happen if I throw two of my characters in the same proverbial room and let them just have it out. It's a good dialogue exercise, but it also helps build the persona, speech pattern, everything else of the character.
Mm-hmm.
Dogs are freaking out, of course. I'll be right back.
Sorry.
I'm not making you get up. You look comfortable.
Hi, Red.
Hello. I just got back from the psychiatrist.
Fun. Did they give you shiny new medicines?
Good.
Oh, exciting.
Yeah.
Hopefully they have the fun kind of side effects instead of the crappy ones.
Yeah, that's good.
I have a ring on the floor. Actually, that's an earring on the floor. That's not one of... I thought it was one of my chainmail rings. It's an earring. It's blue.
Oh, that would be your daughter's nose ring.
Oh, yuck. I'll put that up here. Ick. Fake, of course.
I figured. She's a bit young for facial piercings, I think. My opinion, anyway.
I don't know if the point of it is to make her mother alarmed or to see if she can get a response out of us, and she's been very unsuccessful with the latter.
When I was 19 and got my lip pierced, I called from Florida because I went to Florida, and so I called because I got it done while I was on vacation there. I called home to warn my parents of my new lip ring.
I have a question for you, though, since you brought that up. Prior to the call, did you already have the dialogue in your head as to what you predicted how you predicted the conversation to go?
Well, I gave them like 5 years of warning on my first tattoo, so and my mother still freaked out and tried to rub it off.
Well, this is kind of where I want to touch on something else, though, because in addition to the writers, so to speak, having character models, or people that wargame to a degree have a model of how a character should act or react or what have you, or role players for that matter. There's another element, which is that we have psychological models built for everyone we know.
Yeah. Oh, I expected my father. I think I expected my father to make some sort of threat upon seeing it, at least. What I did not expect was for my mother to convey his reaction over the phone, because I only very rarely talk to my father. Like if I call the house, unless it's I need him for something very specific, then the just general conversation tends to go to mom. But if I have very specific adulting questions for my dad, then I can get him on the phone for hours and hours, and the conversation devolves into politics, which we love to bicker about. But my father said that the first thing he's going to do when he sees it is rip it out.
There have been a couple occasions that my wife and I are sitting there in the car, and we're just driving along, and it's usually me. I think she's done it once or twice. I'm not positive. I think you've done it at least once. But there have been occasions that I'll sit there, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, after 20, 30 minutes of silence, I'll blurt something out, some kind of question or what have you, and she'll look at me like, what the hell are you talking about? And I'll then pause and I'll think, oh, I'm sorry, I was having an entire conversation with you in my head.
Vince and I do the same thing.
It's because
And then we
after
get
you
into
know
stupid
somebody and after you have this strong model, you can have a conversation in your head. And the weird thing is sometimes it's fairly reliable.
Yeah. No, Vince and I don't tend to argue about things that actually matter. Things that actually matter, we have a very calm, rational discussion about, with lots and lots of breaks for me to calm down so I can use my words. Because when I get upset, I tend to have trouble speaking. Like even especially when I'm really, really angry, like I can't talk. I can write it down, that kind of thing. And so there'll be lots and lots of silences when we're actually upset with each other. But just the other day, we had this huge argument, right? Just bickering at each other about and this is a thing that it's not even going to be a thing for years, right? We're registering for stuff for our wedding, like for gifts and things. And I was looking at cutlery trays, and I was like, no, I think I'm just going to have you build me a cutlery tray. And he's like, oh, okay, well, then I can do it like this. And he starts talking, and it's all complicated, and I can't see it in my head because the way he's explaining it isn't working. And I'm like, I just want rectangles. And he's like, no, you will not have compound rectangles. Anytime the word rectangle comes up for the last week, he's like, no compound rectangles. And of course, anytime we argue, right, we wind up just laughing so hard because we're arguing about something so stupid.
Yeah.
And we're not actually arguing about anything that matters. And that's, I don't know, it's our way of, like, releasing, like, anger and annoyedness about stuff that we can't necessarily control, but we're just generally really content with each other and need to find something to argue about. I'm not sure which. Like,
I don't know. I can't answer that one either.
yeah. It could be either, or it could be both. I don't know, but our arguments almost always end with laughter, like with us cracking up about something one of us has said and how stupid the argument as a whole has been. Like,
And the sad part is that you could probably have half of these arguments without needing the other party.
yeah.
This is one thing that's always confused me, though, because there are all these people that claim to channel loved ones and all this kind of stuff. You know, the psychics that claim that they can talk to the dead. And I'm thinking, don't these people they're talking to have solid enough, you know, mental images of this person in their head that they could have these conversations themselves? Now, they know it's not real in that sense, and I think they're looking to, you know, for somebody else to make it more real for them. But I wouldn't think that the model, so to speak, presented by the other person that's never met the loved one would be able to make a reliable model. That don't these people sit back and say, this doesn't comport with my knowledge of this person, or anything along those lines? That's one kind of disconnect. It always kind of confuses me with why people let themselves get scammed by these kind of notions.
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose that's almost an aside.
Yeah.
We've gotten a little bit off the initial topic, and we're almost at the hour mark. Wow, this has been fun so far. But yeah, I mean, I can't think of anyone that I've met that I don't have some kind of vague model in my head for. And honestly, I'll tell you, the people that tend to surprise me most are people like, well, Cliff, who their thought processes are just a little bit different than the norm.
Mm.
You're harder to predict, which is why I love inviting you to those weird off-air recorded for snip shows, because you're going to say the thing I don't expect, typically. Because you're hard to get a concrete mental model of.
See, I don't know whether that's
It's hard to get a concrete mental anything.
Is that a compliment or not?
It depends on the
I
circumstance.
think it's a compliment.
Yeah.
It means
And
you're
also
interested in
agreements.
keep inviting. I guess that's good. On the
Don't worry,
downside,
I recognise it as a positive comment. I just made a joke out of it.
on the other hand, I'm still going to sit there and invite you to these horrendous hangouts in which I'm sitting there making you listen to woo huckster bullshit. So, it might be a drawback too.
Well, I find those kind of interesting in the WTF moments of it.
There's a lot of those.
Yeah.
But my goal with the second topic of Power Woo, which is part of what inspired this conversation to begin with, is since I'm moving on from the channeling notion into this notion of these very psychological constructs that in some cases I think they're regarding as real things. I want to see if I can draw the connection between notions like these tulpa things, which aren't real, they're just psychological constructs that people have basically invested enough time and effort in that they can have interactions with them, much like we have psychological models of our loved ones that we can sit there and have entire conversations in our heads with without the need for the other person's participation sometimes. And trying to see if I can get some of these people potentially to understand that when they're claiming to be channeling higher dimensional beings or angels or demons or aliens or whatever the fuck else they think that they're bringing in and channeling, all they're really doing is communicating through the use of a psychological construct that they've built within their own mind. Because honestly, when I started covering the channeling thing, this is something I did years ago. And covering it made me a little bit uncomfortable because I'm like, okay, here's this kind of dogma almost, this thing that I never bothered to sit down and try and explain or understand. What is it? And as I got deeper into examining it and came across this notion, and this thing of this tulpa was presented to me, I'm like, it's like when I'm modeling character, and Rose was actually the one that referenced this. It's like what we do when we're modeling characters for writing that we do, or the construct you have for, what one of your loved ones is most likely to respond with, or what have you. That you can basically prep for an entire conversation with somebody that you know well by anticipating what their most likely responses would be and what your best response would be, and you can plan for conversations this way because we do this kind of psychological modeling for, well, just about everything. And once I looked at it in that context, I'm like, okay, now it all makes perfect sense, but why do these idiots think they're talking to aliens? Because they've read other people's accounts of allegedly channeling aliens, so they already have that construct in their mind from what they've seen from these other people, and it's why they so readily judge whether somebody else's channeling is real or not, is based upon whether it resonates with their psychological model of what these things are and how they should respond.
Well, of course, then there's the Jungian answer, which would be, of course, all of this channeling is real.
Oh yeah, absolutely, but it's only experientially real. It's only real as a product of the mind, not in any actualized sense. And that's something that was almost touched on. However, in terms of the video that I'm dealing with for this topic, which should be 3 installments, maybe 4, is
long videos.
They were stupidly long videos, and cutting them up into smaller bits is a bitch because of how much random crap is thrown in with it. But this notion of a subjective reality or subjective truth as opposed to the objective or what have you. Now, I get that because that's more of a Jungian concept, but I think that she's approaching it wrong. Because she's approaching the notion of something that's subjectively true or subjectively real, something that's only exists in your mind, as something that's more actualized than simply a product of the mind.
Is that this Teal Swan girl?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Those videos are painful.
Yeah. And I've basically made an agreement with the rest of the household that after I move on from this topic, I'm not going back to her anytime too soon because, well, frankly, she annoys everyone and her background gives people headaches.
Hmm.
The
Yes.
little weird chimey noises and all this other crap is just headache causing.
I think it's one of those brass bowls that with the thing that you run in a circle along the rim of the bowl and it
I
makes
love
a
singing
sound.
bowls.
Yeah, she loves singing
Those,
bowls.
that's what they're called.
And
But-
I absolutely love them. Whatever that is bad.
Yeah, it's a very discordant sound, I guess is a good enough way to put it.
Yeah.
That's a singing bowl. It's a cheap, crappy one.
Yeah.
Now there's another kind of construct that we build as another theoretical, and this construct I think is something that's almost psychologically damaging to people a lot of the time. And Rose, I don't think you're one that necessarily dealt with this too much, either that or you were just nice enough to come down to reality. And I don't know if Cliff has bothered doing this, but it's the notion of that theoretical person that you're out looking for. That, partner, that, the ideal of who you're looking for. And I think that this is the kind of construct that we all build in terms of our ideal of what we want our partner to be like, that tends to be a problem for a lot of people.
Yeah. I never did. I never had any real notion of who that ideal partner would be or what they would be like. I just knew that I'd know it when I found it. And so even in high school and whatnot, anytime I was dating, within a matter of just a few months, I had an idea of whether or not this was a person I could potentially spend my life with. And if they weren't, then I was like, okay, I'm done. And I would stop dating them because they weren't a person that I want. I knew that they weren't the right person. Except with Vince. Vince and I did date in high school. And I did dump Vince in high school after a month and a half. That was the record for my high school relationships, mind you. That was the longest relationship I had in high school. It was a month and a half, and it was with Vince. And I think I broke up with him, and I thinking about it after the fact and for years since, realized that I think I got scared. Because I realized that this was potentially a person I could spend my life with.
Yeah.
Once he grew up. That was we were sophomores. We were 15.
Yeah, I've mastered immortality. I have. My last girlfriend told me I'd never grow up the way I'm going. I'm going to live forever.
Oh no, Vince. There's a large part of him that will never grow up, but he's gotten to the point where he recognizes what's appropriate in various situations.
Yeah, my
that's the big difference. It's almost just the filter needed to develop.
Yeah, my ex actually had this thing going on that she was trying to take herself incredibly serious and trying to act like, so the grown-up, and as a result could never understand or realize when she was being childish. And I went from that to somebody that's, refuses to grow up. They're a Toys R Us kid.
I'm eating Pop-Tarts!
But at the same point, she lets me have and be fun. She lets me be who I want to be.
Yeah.
I can sit there and goof off. And I think that that's something that a lot of people get so hung up on trying to present themselves a certain way, try and present a model of who they are, that they start they stop giving themselves permission to have fun.
Yeah.
I've always felt the idea is, be yourself, because you can't be anybody else.
But that's the problem, is most people will trying to quote unquote be themselves or are creating a model of who they want to present to the world, as opposed to just trying to be who they are internally.
Yeah. I think that's part of where my social phobias come from. I get so anxious when there's strangers about and they can see me, and so how I act and am perceived, like in my brain, they're all judging me so harshly.
I kind of had a similar thing when I was younger, so I used to wear glasses everywhere, technically sunglasses, lightly tinted so that it didn't really interfere. But in my thought, it was kind of that whole, the eyes are the doorway to the soul, so you can't really see my eyes directly kind of weirdness.
Mm.
And then you had a child called Thick Shades. Ba-dum-bum.
But no, I did not. I take no responsibility for that asshat. Thank you for that. Well, I've invited Jade and don't know if her computer is going to cooperate or not.
See, and that right there goes back again to the how much can we really know a person?
It does. It really does.
Because we all, we all do. We all put on airs. To varying degrees.
We do, and I mean the thing is, this is when I did my video talking about hats. This kind of stuff was on my mind, because depending on what hat I'm wearing, as I put it, or what framework I'm answering from, the answer is going to be very different. Yeah. Because I do have different sub-personas within me. Because this is how I evaluate things. There's different aspects of myself, and when I'm looking at whether it be a problem that I need to solve or just any kind of scenario, I will look at it from so many different divergent angles that, going at it from a spiritual perspective is going to give me one answer, and from a skeptical perspective another, from completely logical or completely, it's all these different viewpoints, the psychology of it, etc. I'm going to come up with different answers depending on how I approach it, and I think to try to get an idea of the big picture, you kind of have to.
Yeah. And I don't know, I think of that kind of thing more as what kind of mood I'm in, really. Because there are some days when I'm just feeling incredibly contrary. And so it doesn't matter what you ask me, my answer is no. Or no it isn't. No, you're wrong. Nope. And it doesn't matter what the question is. Is the sky blue? Nope. The sky is fuchsia. I have decided. And it's just what kind of mood I'm in.
Yeah.
Is more how it feels to me. It's if I'm in the mood to make a mockery of things, to just joke and have fun, then often I'm also feeling somewhat contrary. But it varies. Whereas some days I'm in a mood to be that intellectual self.
And at the same point, it's not an inconsistency, it's just another aspect of the self, because we aren't just one thing.
Exactly. We are many things.
And I think this is part of why we're able to build such comprehensive psychological constructs in general, is because there's so many different aspects to ourselves that we can tend to identify with different things in others.
Yeah. And
just take these and put them in a big pile and say, this is close enough to so-and-so. Or at least how so-and-so presents themselves.
Yeah.
Is this one of the reasons why relationships break up? That someone's not living up to the expectation you expect of them?
I'd say...
The scenario that you created around for them?
I think a lot of relationships partway through, one or both of the participants will start living the relationship themselves, inside their own head without any input from the other party. And I think this is the downfall of a lot of relationships.
Yeah. Well, I think also, I think a lot of it has to do with unrealistic expectations. Like, look at the 1960s housewife, and everything that was expected of her. And to a degree, a lot of straight men still expect, to come home to a clean house with their wife's shaved legs and waxed vagina.
Ooh, that sounds painful. Sorry.
I imagine so.
Never mind.
And dinner on the table, and the wife perfect in heels, etc. I think when that's because often when couples are dating, the woman is so careful to anytime there's a date, have to shave the legs, have to make sure everything's perfect. If we're coming back to my place, the house should be clean, etc., etc. When really, perhaps this person, like me, is not so good about keeping a clean house, hates shaving her legs, never puts on makeup unless it's something important.
I was about to say that by our third date, I'd probably stopped shaving my legs per normal, but I'm not even sure I did it for our first date.
Yeah, well, our first date wasn't exactly planned.
Yeah.
But, The thing is, I'm always one of these big, don't bother putting up on makeup kind of people, because this is one of the things we do is, whether it's me putting on a hat or a woman putting on makeup to some degree, or what have you. There's a little bit of that, the personality shifts. You put me in a three-piece suit, my personality is significantly different than when I'm sitting there wearing my, frumpy house shirt just for the sake of having my arms covered when it's chilly. It's very different.
Yeah.
I'd say I tend to be exactly the same, because I don't really swear, and I'm fairly well spoken, I suppose you could say. The one thing though, if I'm visiting someone different, not so much someone different, but like, let's say a girlfriend's parents.
Yeah.
Or I'm visiting America.
Someplace where the expectations are different.
Yeah, I become incredibly British and polite when I visit America.
I mean, myself, on the other hand, I've got a pair of, I refer to them as tanker boots. They're actually not. They're just basically biker boots. I got those at a Harley shop or something, I think. And, yeah, I was in Colorado.
Well,
It
Harley.
wasn't a Harley shop, it was just a motorcycle shop.
Okay.
Okay.
I do. Yeah, I was going to say, I don't remember spending like 3 times as much for them. Huh. Anyway, motorcycle.
And they haven't fallen
But
apart
regardless,
yet.
they're big, they're heavy, they're steel-toed. Just putting them on, I have no choice but to walk differently while wearing them. So since I'm already walking differently, my persona adjusts to the behavior.
And you feel more like a badass.
A little bit. A little bit. I feel a little bit more stompy anyway around it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's like
a little bit of extra belligerence, a little bit more of skeptic squirrel comes out, so to speak.
yeah, like when I was living in Austin, if I was going to 6th Street in the evening or at night for anything, I typically would wear jeans and, a cute top or something, and boots, but knee-high kind of motorcycle boots, basically, which made me feel like I could kick ass.
Bitch boots.
And thus I felt safer.
Yeah.
Like I was less concerned about wandering around a not necessarily very good neighborhood in the dark at night.
Rabbit's foot to a degree is almost,
Yeah.
but a little bit more organic, I'd say, than less superstition required.
Yeah. It was more an I feel safer this way. And
let's see now, what time are we at?
and so my bearing would change very much as I'm walking down 6th Street, my entire demeanor said, don't talk to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, do not fuck with me.
And people respond to that intuitively as well.
Yeah. Some
Because
don't when they're drunk.
They see the way you're carrying yourself and the way you're walking, and they immediately start building a mental model of who you are in their head.
Yeah.
That in an apartment complex I used to live in.
Yeah.
Same.
I
I lived off East Riverside in Austin, so
Yeah.
which is the bad part of town.
Yeah.
You talk, I make coffee.
I had to call the police twice in the first month that I lived there.
Ooh, mine wasn't that bad.
And it was just nuisance stuff. One was a homeless guy trying to sell me crappy jewelry that you wouldn't sell at a garage sale. But he followed me up to my apartment.
Oh, yeah, that's not okay.
And the other one, I told him to stay right there on the steps, that I'd call someone who was interested. I thought the police might be interested.
I was going to say that they're flashing blue lights on the car.
Yes. And then one was just a weird neighbor who brought me steak, which, can't eat that. But then wanted his dish back, and I didn't return it in time, and he started doing fucked up shit to my door.
Yeah.
Trying to scare me.
Because people are charming that way.
And he was still there when the police showed up. But after that, I was also not in a great place mentally at the time. And I just decided, fuck this shit, I'm not calling the cops again. someone messes with me, I'm going to take out all this rage I have inside. And yes, I will get hurt, but I'm going to beat the shit out of them. After that, no one messed with me.
Yeah.
Never had to call the cops again.
Because suddenly you had this demeanor of, please, try.
That was exactly it. It was, I'd leave work, I'd drive home. By the time I got there, it was still just, bring it on, bitch.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was a bit like that at school. And people used to tease me a little bit, but they never used to get me into a fight because I had a bit of a rage. And I would just tear through people, and it was the only rage. It wasn't skill, just rage. I wouldn't feel pain; it would just be rage. And then afterwards, sorry.
I said, and you're not a small guy either.
No, that always kind of helped. I've picked people up on my back. Their legs are dangling off the floor.
That's how Vince met one of his best friends. But of course, he grabbed him by the throat and pinned him to the wall.
Yeah, I've done that as well. What tended to happen would be that I would get upset and angry, and I'd hurt somebody, and they'd end up with blood dripping from their face or something, and I'd end up in a corner crying because I was upset and losing my temper. But people didn't mess with me. They used to kind of try and wind me up just to the edge of it, but they knew there was a line.
Yeah.
And if they went over the line, it would not be good for them.
Yeah.
So generally, I only had maybe 1 or 2 fights in any school that I ever went to.
Oh, Rose?
Yes.
I have a quote for you from a certain religious website.
Oh.
Being a feminist will only lead to hell, where you will burn for the rest of your days. So ladies, repent and get a husband so you can be saved.
Oh no!
Yeah, that's just what the world needs.
I think the worst rage I've ever had, and the guy he was lucky. It was just fortuitous. It was one of those instances where he'd been picking at me for months, and was in woodwork class, and he did the shoulder thing, where he sort of walks past someone and just poof, And I went back to my desk, and a bit like the milk boiling over, I just went, and I went up behind him and I thwacked him right between the shoulder blades, knocked him out cold.
Ooh.
A good job that I only did that, because I remember looking down at the desk and seeing a chisel and thinking what I could do with it, and I changed my mind. It kind of frightened me, that.
And Jade did not have audio, so she'll try to come back in a moment. But, this is... There we go. Let's see if Jade can hear now. Jade, dearie. Jade, honey, can you hear me?
Jade.
Dum 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 dum. Yeah, we did kind of wander off topic, but that's okay. We're about at the hour-and-a-half mark, so we'll continue a few more minutes. And for the sake of the people that are watching, yeah, I know I didn't actually do the XSplit stream thing, so there is no live chat. I'll try and do more of that because apparently there's more requests for it these days. I will type as I speak. Jade! I think she's having audio issues.
I wonder if her computer's got back working. I wonder if she's got the audio set up for it.
Oh, yes, we should copy and yes, that.
Yeah.
I was going to say copy and paste that.
Yeah, we're probably going to only run this for a little bit longer. There were a couple other people that I invited that I was hoping might be able to show up. A little impromptu, but... give me a second.
What was the start about anyway? Because I came in sort of half hour after you finished.
Well, initially I'd gotten RJ and Rose in here and invited a couple other people that write, and we were going to talk about this almost exclusively from the writer's perspective.
Hmm.
And then RJ had to head out early, so I'm like, who else can I bring in?
And you chose me?
Because I alone am not enough content.
Well, I love talking with Rose and going back and forth, but I was worried that might not be enough for the audience. So,
Yeah, and we also tend to agree quite a lot.
Yes, enough so that it's kind of obnoxious at times.
Yeah, gets a little echo chambery.
Jade, you can hear us now. Is your mic working, though? Mighty, mighty Jade. Maybe, maybe not. She's still muted. That's the other thing about when I run it through XSplit, you can actually tell when people have muted themselves. Or been muted, for that matter. Because that shows up on there, too. That and a little commentary. I should just work with that more often.
No one can tell when I'm muted most of the time.
You think she lost connection? Good grief. Poor Jade.
Yeah. She's had a bit of a computer nightmare lately, hasn't she?
Yeah.
What was it? Is it 3 computers have failed on her, or is it 2?
Oh, she's been having a heck of a time.
Oh, that's the worst. That's what tends to happen to me. One thing fails, and then everything else starts to it just dominoes.
Yeah.
Do you know, this reminds me of Foreboding Fruit a few weeks ago, when he was saying that he's a pessimist and what can go wrong will go wrong, and it's like, and how's that not fundy kind of attitude?
Superstitious crap?
Yeah, you know.
Is he a fundamentalist Murphy's Lawian?
Yeah.
And if we can get Jade back in here, we can return to psychological constructs for another moment, but I'm hoping to get her in there, and if we can't get her in here, then we've about talked this out. I will probably end it shortly thereafter, but I've also invited in Oki, because he's commenting on an aside, so why the hell not? And we have Oki, and we have Jade. Jade, how's your audio? Jade! 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 Cough, cough.
Yeah.
Yeah. You need a cat face with that. Okay. Yeah, she's also in the middle of an upload to YouTube, and apparently that might be screwing it up, so... Unfortunately, Jade's voice will probably not be heard this time, but we'll find out if she suddenly chimes in later. But the general topic, which we're going to return to at least for a couple more minutes, is the notion of psychological constructs. The models we build for other people. Whether it be you meet somebody on the street and you start, you basically come to this snap notion of who they are based upon the way they carry themselves or how they speak or present themselves, to the writer's mindset and how we develop characters in our heads that we can even actually have interactions with, or take these two characters and just, so to speak, stick them in a room within our brain and let the two characters argue about things or what have you.
And also the actor's mindset does that.
Actor's mindset as well, yes, that you get into the thought processes of whatever character that you're doing and you present things that way and act accordingly. All these different kinds of notions.
Have you mentioned how it's interesting when you got someone who dresses a certain way and you think they're going to be like something, but they're not?
That's also psychological modeling, yeah. A friend of mine and myself did an experiment with that at one point. We went out to a nice little family restaurant, and I was wearing a big old pair of shit kickers and his leather jacket and this Confederate-looking cap. Actually, I think it was an actual, authentic Confederate hat, now that I think of it. And just that and some beat-up old jeans and whatnot, and I'm just sitting there, and I immediately got into character once the attire suited me. And he was wearing my trench coat and flannel shirt and all this other stuff. So we look like the dregs of fucking humanity. And we go in there and we sit down, we're both kind of in character. And he kind of picked on me at one point because I stiffened up when some real bikers came in. But beyond that, we're sitting there and we're kind of observing everyone else in the room and how they're looking at us and regarding us and all the conclusions they've made. And he glances to this one table diagonal to us, which has these two women that are very well dressed sitting there that are looking kind of sidelong out of the corner of their eyes at us and hemming and hawing and, you know, that whole kind of thing. And my friend kind of glances over them and smiles and says, "That thing we were discussing yesterday, do you remember that?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, I remember it." He's like, "You want to get into that discussion again?" I'm like, "Well, I could." I said it would seem almost weird. He goes, "That's the point." So we started talking about the notion of perceptual realities potentially having an influence on the core reality that everyone experiences. Mind you, this is back when I was doing the whole shaman thing. And it's funny because on some levels this ties in with notions like the secret, that you're basically making your own reality. Now, in my case, it was more inflicting your will upon reality to try to adjust it in varied ways. But the problem is this entire notion breaks down when you realize that even if you could impose your will upon reality to try and affect reality, your will would have to be in conflict with the will of every other thing in existence. So I go in this whole long thing, about how the subjective could potentially affect the objective, and where that entire notion breaks down, basically defeating the secret long before the secret had ever been put out as being a thing. So I go through this like 20-minute talk on this, and I paused and I said, and that's more or less it. I mean, so was there something specific you wanted? He goes, "Oh yeah," and he gave it to me. I'm like, "What?" And he goes, like that, and points to the adjacent table, and I look over these two women that are very well dressed, that had been looking at us being scum of the earth, whose jaws were dangling on the floor 3 feet behind them.
I have a similar story. I was on the debate team in high school, and thus, being a girl in high school, other girls from high school would sometimes sleep over at my house, or I would sleep over at their house. And the first time my friend Lonnie slept over at my house, she and I were sitting in the dining room while my parents were in the living room, and Lonnie and I were talking, just throwing back some philosophical stuff, because debate team, you study a lot of philosophy. And we're just throwing some stuff back and forth, and of course we're both very verbose. And my mother commented the next day, she was like, "I don't think I've ever heard y'all talk like that," because I was a goth in high school.
Yeah.
Like, with the fake piercings, and I had the crazy red hair. I didn't do black hair, but I wore all the black and the huge pants and everything. And my mom was like, it was so strange. It was like a couple of post-grad college kids were in my dining room instead of you. Because I've never had those kind of conversations with my mom. Because she just doesn't, I don't know, do philosophy.
Yeah.
Really? Or maybe she does, but we've never really had those kind of conversations, even now. My dad and I have gotten into sort of those kind of debates and had at the time, but my own, like, political and philosophical leanings were more colored by his at the time. If that makes sense. I hadn't been out on my own at all, so I hadn't formed my own opinions, really.
That makes perfect sense to me. Man, I don't know. A lot of the people that I see that are into this new agey stuff, a lot of them are in their early 20s. And it's funny because that conversation that I referenced earlier was something that I had in my early 20s.
Oh no, that conversation I referenced, I was 15.
But, this
breaking down the Kant's categorical imperative.
Well, the thing is, though, you get there's some point in the teens through to sometime right about the mid-20s that you have this weird idealism about how the world should be and how people should treat each other and all this other stuff, and eventually you kind of grow the fuck up. But I remember being that age and thinking that I had all the fucking answers. And my model of the ideal of what a person should be like was just so radically different than what's even, I think, possible for a human being.
Two things. The first one is Jade sent me a message. Just I tried but couldn't make a good connection.
Yeah, that's okay.
Keep uploading stuff, so it's messing up with the bandwidth. Anyway, the other one is I came to realize probably about 10 years ago now, I suppose, that when we're 15, we think we know everything, and then we get to be 18 and we say, yeah, well, when I was 15, I thought I knew everything, but now I know everything. And then they get to 20 and they think they knew everything then, and when they were younger, they didn't know everything.
Get about 26, 27, and you start realizing you don't know shit.
Yeah.
And that your parents never taught you how to adult.
No, my parents taught me how to adult. I had to figure out on my own how to kid.
Understandable.
which is kind of sad in a way.
Very. I worry that Vince and I will do that to our potential children.
I spent the majority of my life taking myself way too seriously. And it was funny because it wasn't until I had kids of my own that I gave myself permission to stop being so damn serious.
Mm.
And I think it's fair to say that on a lot of levels, the construct, the psychological construct that was the me that I opted to show other people wasn't who I was on the inside.
Well, if it's any help, I don't really take you too seriously now. Does that
Oh,
make
good. No, that's perfectly fine. I mean, that's the thing is, I've been hoping to get some trolls. I'm going around annoying people on some of these other, some hangouts that are Woo related and some videos that are Woo related, hoping to get some trolls just because I want a mailbox, so that I can have a special feature added with mailbox of people saying stupid shit.
Just your own textfiles.com, eh? MyTrollSpam.com.
It's like, yay, somebody said something stupid. Check it out. Or better yet, ooh, look, some idiot threatened me. This is a very bad threat. Let me tell you how you should have worded this.
You see,
You can bring me in for the grammar.
Here.
I will gladly assist on those with the grammar.
Okay, you're the newbie, so I'm going to annoy you now.
Okay.
Seeing as you just joined this. What people in your life do you think you have the strongest psychological models of? Meaning that you could theoretically have an entire interaction in your head with them with some reliability.
With some reliability. My cat. Did you mean human peoples?
Oh, I was thinking human peoples, but that's a good thing. That's a good point too, and something we haven't touched on yet, which is that we do even build. Because I was saying, we kind of anthropomorphize and what have you, but in terms of pets, we do have models for them too in our heads.
Well, cats are easy, isn't it? I mean, let's say. So I have this thing that lives with me that only wants attention when it wants attention, but if I want it to give me attention, it just doesn't really care too much. That it'll lift its leg and lick its bottom at the most inopportune moments. It'll put hairs on everything you're wearing, and try and trip you up in the night if you walk,
My roommate and I.
think that's kind of an under characterization of a cat. Like, I mean, they're dicks. Don't get me wrong. Cats are dicks. But at the same time, too, they're a life form, and they are crafty bastards. You have to give it that.
Oh, yeah.
And with me not quite knowing how a conversation would go with my cat, but knowing that just the look in my cat's eyes, I can have a 9 out of 10 guess as to what he's going to do. It's kind of a beautiful thing.
I think one of the most amusing things I did with my cat, who is no longer around anymore, but he was sat on the floor in front of me, licking, doing some grooming, so he's licking his shoulder. So I decided to make fun, so I started going like that, making a slurping noise so he could hear me. And, so there's the cat sat on the ground going like this, and suddenly he realised that I was mimicking him. He just sort of stopped in half lick and just turned his head and looked at me as if to say, "Are you taking the piss?"
Are you taking the piss? In Canada, he'd say, "What the fuck are you looking at, motherfucker?"
Yeah.
Well, we are past.
Sorry. Go
I
ahead.
know.
Go 13.
I was going to say we're past the 1:30 mark, and I was planning on cutting it off at about the hour-and-a-half mark. We're not great on viewers, but we do have a few. Thank you for the join. Thank you for those of you who will watch in the future. Some of the segments of this will be taken and used as clips in an upcoming video because I'm going to be going after this notion of, well, first off, some of the bullshit that people are claiming to be channeling, the notions of angels and demons and aliens, oh my, and basically breaking them down to be these psychological constructs, aka tulpas, and seeing if we can try and disambiguate some more of these bullshit New Age beliefs and how they're taking yet another concept and bringing it to the extent of the ridiculous. Now we have a lion on cam now, and has that lion developed his own personality yet?
Oh, man.
Still working on it, are you?
Yeah.
It
So
kind of
pick a random name. So far, it's been Maury and.
The more you play with it, the more organically it arises, because it becomes, it becomes a psychological projection to a degree.
It's true. I've been playing with the puppet a lot. My hands were quite cooked red earlier from sitting there for like an hour and a half and wearing this goddamn thing.
Oh, dude, tell me about it. With some of my puppets, especially Fundy Fox, it's like this inside his head. So after a few minutes, I'm like, "Ow, my hand! Get it out! Get it out!"
Well, it's the fact that this is
so's
the
fox. The fox is saying the same thing. Your hand, get it out, get it out, get it out.
Well, the fox and I have an understanding. His brain has 2 lobes consisting of 2 fingers.
But yeah,
But on that
you
note,
really seem to like the lion.
on that note, we're going to see about cutting it short. Rose, you going to be around for a little bit longer, or do you have stuff to do around the house?
No, I can hang out.
Do we want to do a secondary hangout after this? A little bit more just random invite?
Yeah,
Of
go.
course.
Okay, cool.
I can come back later. I'm going to go and get some money out of Cash Point and then order a takeout curry.
Okay, cool. Well,
You're
have
getting
fun.
curry?
I'm going to take this off, and probably in a little bit we'll see about going back online with one of my more usual broadcasts, so to speak.